Hello, my name is Jesus. I am sorry I cannot be present in class today to give my presentation. I have to attend some family matters. However, I have provided a video in which I'll discuss the topic of my research paper. The topic of my research paper is prostitution. More specifically, I will discuss why prostitution must remain illegal in the state of California. But before I discuss the main topic of my research paper, I will provide brief information about prostitution. Prostitution is said to be the world's oldest profession because there's a ton of evidence, such as ancient writings and artifacts that have been uncovered by archaeologists that show prostitution has been in existence for thousands of years. For instance, the first recorded record of prostitution can be traced back to the Sumer civilization. According to academic scholars, the Sumer civilization was the world's first civilization that began in 4000 BC. This means the practice of prostitution is at least 6,000 years old. In addition, the past decades, archaeologists have discovered other texts and artifacts that show prostitution existed during the Byzantine, the Roman, the Greek, and the Egyptian empires. However, scholars and historians do not know the exact origin of prostitution. Thus, the practice of prostitution can be older than 6,000 years. Scholars and historians may not know the origin of prostitution, but scholars and historians are certain that once prostitution came into existence, it spread throughout the world, plaguing every civilization, nation, and empire. This explains why historians and scholars have discovered evidence of prostitution in every society or culture they have studied. This also explains why prostitution can be traced throughout history. Eventually, as time passed, the United States was founded on July 4th in the year 1776. After a while, prostitution emerged in the United States and was considered a problem. Thus, every state in the U.S. criminalized prostitution. However, in the past decades, the status of prostitution has become a topic of debate in the U.S. In other words, there are individuals and organizations attempting to legalize prostitution in the U.S. because they believe prostitution should not be criminalized, but legalized. In opposition, there are individuals and organizations that believe prostitution must remain criminalized, thus they are fighting to keep it criminalized. For instance, in the past decades, the legal status of prostitution has become a major issue in the state of Nevada because individuals and organizations were attempting to repeal the laws that criminalize prostitution, to implement laws that would legalize prostitution in Nevada. However, those against the legalization of prostitution in Nevada were trying to protect the laws that criminalize prostitution in Nevada. Unfortunately, those in favor of legalizing prostitution were successful, and Nevada became the first and only state to legalize prostitution in the U.S. during the 1970s. In fact, Nevada is still the only state in the U.S. where prostitution is legalized. This leads to the main topic of my paper. More recently, in the past decade, individuals have formed organizations in the state of California. These organizations have one purpose in mind, and their purpose is to revoke the law that criminalizes prostitution in California and to establish laws that will legalize prostitution in California, making California the second state in the U.S. with legal prostitution. However, there are other organizations against the legalization of prostitution fighting to keep prostitution criminalized in California. California outlawed prostitution in 1872, and it remains illegal to this day. Therefore, in California, prostitution, solicitation, and agreeing to engage in prostitution are misdemeanor offenses. The possible penalties that you may face if you are convicted are jail time up to 6 months, fines up to $1,000, additionally jail time if you are a repeat offender. You may face additional penalties depending on the specific circumstances of your case. For example, if you are caught committing a prostitution offense while in your vehicle, you may be required to forfeit the vehicle. Lastly, being convicted of a prostitution offense does not automatically require you to register as a sex offender. However, though it is not especially common, it is possible that the judge could order you to register as a sex offender as part of your penalty, depending on the details of your case. The individuals and organizations that support the legalization of prostitution in California provide many arguments justifying why they are attempting to legalize prostitution in California. For instance, those that support the legalization of prostitution in California claim cases of human trafficking will decrease in the state of California if prostitution is legalized. Their second argument claims sexual violence will decrease in California if prostitution is legalized. Their third argument claims the legalization of prostitution in California will control the expansion of the sex industry in California. Their fourth and fifth argument claim the legalization of prostitution in California will decrease child prostitution and organized crime in California. These are the main arguments those in favor of legalizing prostitution use to justify their actions for attempting to legalize prostitution in California. However, those against the legalization of prostitution in California do not agree with the arguments presented by those in favor of legalizing prostitution in California. Instead, they argue legalizing prostitution in California will increase human trafficking, increase child prostitution, which are both forms of exploitation, increase crimes of sexual violence, and expand the sex industry. Initially, I was not sure if the arguments of those in favor of legalizing prostitution were correct, or if the arguments of those against the legalization of prostitution were correct. To determine which side was correct, I read several academic journals studying different countries where prostitution is legal. Upon reading these sources, I discovered several studies and statistics that showed human trafficking increase in countries where prostitution is legal. For instance, Germany legalized prostitution in an effort to combat human trafficking. However, Germany's efforts to combat human trafficking failed because the number of human trafficking incidents doubled and continued to increase after Germany legalized prostitution. In essence, I discovered evidence that showed human trafficking is far more dominant in countries where prostitution is legal. But I could not find any evidence proving human trafficking decreased in countries where prostitution is legal. Further, I researched several academic articles to determine whether or not the legalization of prostitution would increase or decrease sexual violence. Eventually, I discovered that sexual violence increased in the state of Nevada after it legalized prostitution. As a result, Nevada, the one U.S. state where prostitution is legal, has significantly higher rates of sexual violence than any other state and than any other states in the U.S. This shows that the legalization of prostitution will not decrease crimes of sexual violence in California, as argued by those in favor of legalizing prostitution. Instead, the legalization of prostitution will increase crimes of sexual violence in California, as argued by those against the legalization of prostitution. In addition, I discovered evidence from academic journals that revealed the legalization of prostitution will not control the expansion of the sex industry, as argued by those in favor of legalizing prostitution in California. Instead, the sex industry will increase in California. For instance, prostitution has been legal in the Netherlands since 1988, and since the Netherlands legalized prostitution, the sex industry has increased by 25%. Furthermore, those in favor of legalizing prostitution claim the legalization of prostitution in California will decrease child prostitution in California. However, this is incorrect. This argument is incorrect because when the Netherlands legalized prostitution, child prostitution did not decrease. Instead, child prostitution increased by 300% within 4 years. Moreover, since the Netherlands legalized prostitution, it has become one of the top destinations for human trafficking, which means organized crime has increased in the Netherlands since the legalization of prostitution. Therefore, the argument that the legalization of prostitution will decrease organized crime in California is false. In essence, I have discovered evidence that proves the arguments of those in favor of legalizing prostitution in California were incorrect, and the arguments of those against the legalization of prostitution in California were correct. Thus, the legalization of prostitution in California will not decrease exploitation, violence, nor organized crime in California, as argued by those in favor of legalizing prostitution. Instead, the legalization of prostitution in California will increase exploitation, violence, and organized crime, as argued by those against the legalization of prostitution. Thus, it is extremely vital that California does not legalize prostitution, but keeps prostitution criminalized. We could prevent the legalization of prostitution by being politically active. Thus, one could attend a town hall meeting. A town hall meeting is where you, in person, can make your actual voice heard in front of local politicians who have the political power to make change. In addition, one could prevent the legalization of prostitution in California by forming a group or organization with the purpose to prevent the legalization of prostitution in California. With an organization, one can influence the government to keep prostitution criminalized and magnify their voice. However, this will cost time and resources, but organizations could generate capital by seeking individuals that will fund their organization. In addition, one could attend or organize rallies that are safe and lawful to educate individuals why prostitution needs to remain criminalized in California. Most importantly, make sure you are a registered voter to vote against the legalization of prostitution in California if or when the time comes. Thank you.